I wasn't really searching for love at 28. I was too focused on my career as a rising star at my finance firm. Spreadsheets were my love language, and my cubicle felt more like home than any bar or dating app could ever offer. Then came Sarah's rooftop party. Sarah, my coworker and best friend, had a talent for pulling me out of my comfort zone. This time, the crowd was a mix of artists, musicians, and a few familiar faces from the office. That's when I spotted him. He was engaged in a playful debate with another guy about the best way to restore a brick building. Tall and lean, with kind eyes and tousled dark brown hair, he wore a weathered leather jacket over a faded band t-shirt, definitely the opposite of my usual buttoned-up crowd. Yet something about him intrigued me. "So, you think slapping a fresh coat of paint on history is a good idea?" he asked, a playful smile on his lips. The other guy, a stocky dude with a shaved head, rolled his eyes. "Hey, it preserves the structure, right?" "Yeah, but it erases the character," he countered. "The cracks and the wear, that's what tells the story." I found myself inching closer, drawn to their easy banter. Just then, Sarah appeared beside me, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Amelia, this is Mark," she said, nudging me forward. "Mark, this is Amelia, the spreadsheet wizard I told you about." Mark's smile widened as he took me in. "Spreadsheet wizard, huh? Sounds impressive." "It pays the bills," I replied, feeling a blush creep up my cheeks. "But I can hold my own in a conversation that doesn't involve amortization schedules." I winked at Sarah, who chuckled. "Challenge accepted," Mark said, his voice warm and inviting. "So, Amelia the spreadsheet wizard, what do you think about preserving history?" We ended up talking for hours about everything and nothing. He was an architect passionate about breathing new life into old buildings, while I shared stories of my crazy hours at the firm and the thrill of closing a big deal. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before we knew it, we found ourselves standing by the railing overlooking the glittering city skyline. The cool air sent goosebumps prickling down my arms. "This is fun," I admitted, surprised by the slight tremor in my voice. "Yeah," he agreed, his gaze fixed on the city below. "I wouldn't mind doing this again sometime." "Me neither," I blurted out, unable to overthink it. Our first official date was a dinner with Mark's parents, Martha and Arthur, at a fancy restaurant. The conversation flowed easily at first, revolving around wedding plans, the beautiful old library venue I had booked, and the expensive organic caterer I was stressing over. Then, things took a strange turn. Mid-bite of her lobster bisque, pronounced with a peculiar accent, Martha suddenly fixed me with a steely gaze. "So, Amelia," she said, dabbing her lips with a napkin, "Mark tells me you work in finance." "Yes, I'm a financial analyst at a large firm downtown," I replied, unsure where this was heading. "Analyst, huh? Sounds important," Arthur chimed in, his booming voice filling the table. Mark, who had been mostly quiet, cleared his throat. "Dad, come on, that's not what we're talking about." "Just making conversation, son," Arthur said, waving his hand dismissively before turning back to me. "So, Amelia, you mentioned a big-name firm." I told him the name, a global player in the financial world. A satisfied smile spread across Martha's face. "Excellent," she declared. "And you say you do well for yourself? Investments, stocks, that kind of thing?" "Yes, I manage a portfolio," I replied, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. This felt more like an interrogation than a casual dinner with my future in-laws. "A portfolio, huh?" Martha leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "How much are we talking about here, dear?" My jaw dropped. This was outrageous. No one asked questions like that. I glanced at Mark, hoping he'd intervene, but he just fiddled with the breadbasket, avoiding my gaze. "That's really personal information, Mrs. Miller," I said, forcing a smile. "Oh, come on, honey," Martha huffed. "We're practically family now. Isn't that right, Mark?" Mark mumbled something non-committal, his cheeks flushed. I decided to take control of the situation. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "money isn't everything. Mark and I love each other, and that's what matters most." "Love is great, sweetheart," Arthur chimed in again, "but let's face it, love doesn't pay the bills." I took a deep breath. This dinner was turning into a disaster. "Maybe we should stick to talking about the wedding," I suggested, desperately trying to redirect the conversation. The following morning, I called my grandma right after I got off the phone with her. As I recounted the awkward dinner with Mark's parents, a wave of doubt washed over me. Her words about greedy and selfish people echoed in my mind, but I dismissed them. Grandma could be a bit old-fashioned at times. Sure, Martha and Arthur were blunt, but they genuinely seemed happy for us. Maybe they just struggled to express their emotions. Fast forward a few months, and the wedding planning was in full swing. Every detail, from the venue to the flowers, felt like pulling teeth. Whenever money came up, Mark would give a sheepish shrug and say, "Work's been a bit tight lately." His parents, bless their hearts, kept offering suggestions, cheaper venues outside the city, a family friend who could cater at a discount, which really meant they'd barter for vegetables from their neighbor's garden. In the end, I found myself footing most of the bill. Mark, ever the charmer, would say things like, "You're amazing, honey," handling everything like a champ. But his lack of financial contributions started to grate on me. Finally, the big day arrived. It was beautiful. The weather cooperated, the food was delicious, and most importantly, Mark and I said, "I do." The only sour note was Grandma. After the ceremony, she pulled me aside, her wrinkled face etched with concern. "Amelia, honey," she said, her voice low, "be careful with those in-laws of yours. They don't have your best interests at heart." I rolled my eyes. Here we go again. "Grandma, they're just excited. They love Mark. They love me. Everything's fine." The honeymoon phase barely lasted a week before the first major in-law incident occurred. It was a lazy Sunday morning, and Mark and I were still luxuriating in bed when a loud thump from downstairs shattered the peaceful silence. We exchanged confused glances, and Mark mumbled, "Probably the mail." But that thump was soon followed by a cacophony of rustling paper and muffled exclamations. Throwing on our robes, we hurried downstairs, only to find a scene that looked straight out of a horror movie. Well, a horror movie filled with floral wrapping paper and gaudy gift bags. Martha and Arthur were sprawled on the living room floor, surrounded by our wedding presents like vultures picking over a carcass. They were tearing into boxes, oohing and ahhing over some items while dismissively tossing others aside. "What in the world is going on here?" I demanded, disbelief lacing my voice. Martha, mid-unwrapping, looked up and flashed a megawatt smile. "Amelia, darling, just admiring your lovely wedding gifts." "Admiring," I sputtered. "It looks more like you're ransacking the place." Arthur held up a crystal vase, squinting at it. "Relax, sweetheart. Just sorting things out. Can't have all this clutter lying around, can we?" "Clutter," I exclaimed, incredulous. These were gifts chosen with love by our friends and family. Before I could voice my outrage, Mark interjected, "Maybe they should just leave the presents unopened, right?" His tone was mild, but the message was clear. I chimed in. Rael wasn't completely oblivious. Martha scoffed. "Don't be silly, honey. It's rude not to open presents. Besides," she added, her eyes gleaming, "we might find something truly special in here." Special for them, I thought bitterly, watching in growing frustration as they picked through our wedding gifts, setting aside anything that caught their fancy. A silver picture frame, a set of engraved wine glasses, a fancy cheese board. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "These are our wedding gifts," I said, my voice firm. "Not yours to take." "Look, honey," Martha replied, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "We just saw some things that would look lovely in our new house. You know, the one we're decorating." They were redecorating with our wedding gifts. The anger bubbled up inside me, threatening to spill over. "What about the gift you got us?" I asked, my voice tight. Martha paused, her hand hovering over a box wrapped in fancy floral paper. She rummaged through the pile and finally pulled out a small, oddly shaped package. With a flourish, she handed it to me. I unwrapped it slowly, my heart sinking with each layer of tissue paper. Inside was a cheap glass statuette, the kind you find at a discount store, adorned with garish plastic flowers. My stomach churned. This was their idea of a wedding gift. Maybe Grandma was right. Maybe I had married into a nightmare. The wedding gift incident was just the tip of the iceberg. Martha's shopping sprees became a regular occurrence. She'd call, all chipper, asking me to join her for a girls' day out. But it was really just code for me being her unpaid personal shopper. We'd browse stores, and inevitably, Martha would find something she absolutely had to have. At checkout, she'd do this weird shuffle with her purchases and mine, muttering about forgetting her wallet and how inconvenient it was to have separate bags. By the time the cashier figured it all out, I'd be stuck paying for both our stuff. Arthur wasn't much better. Weekends were his prime visiting time. He'd waltz in unannounced, plop himself down on the couch, and proceed to spend the entire day glued to the TV, inhaling whatever snacks I had on hand. When I finally mustered the courage to ask him why he spent so much time at our place, he looked at me with a straight face and said, "Saves money on groceries and electricity, doesn't it?" The audacity of the man. Did he think we were running a charity? Mark, ever the peacekeeper, just rolled his eyes and muttered something about Dad needing some company. But the birthday dinner was the final straw. I decided to treat myself to a nice night out at a fancy restaurant to celebrate another year older and hopefully wiser. Naturally, I invited Martha and Arthur. A big mistake. The menu was a bewildering array of French names and unfamiliar ingredients, but undeterred, Martha and Arthur ordered the most expensive dishes, pronouncing them with a confidence that masked their complete lack of knowledge. Halfway through the meal, Martha pushed her plate away, declaring that the escargot was too slimy. Arthur, meanwhile, choked on a mouthful of bouillabaisse, spraying saffron broth across the table. The entire evening was a disaster. By the time the bill arrived, my blood pressure was through the roof. The cost of that meal could have fed us for a month. And guess who offered to chip in? Nope, not Mark. He just sat there, oblivious, while I choked out a strained thank you to the waiter and reached for my credit card. Back home, fuming and frustrated, I finally confronted Mark. "How can you just let your parents walk all over you like that?" I demanded. "Come on, babe," he said dismissively. "It's not a big deal. They're just, like that." "Like what?" "Selfish and entitled." I shot back. "Mark, this isn't okay." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I love you, but you've got to pick your battles. My parents are, well, my parents. They're not going to change." Maybe he was right. Perhaps I had been naive, hoping to change them, to somehow mold them into the in-laws I'd always dreamed of. But the reality was staring me in the face. Martha and Arthur were who they were, and that wasn't going to change. The birthday dinner debacle was a turning point, but it wasn't the end. Their gift-giving strategy became painfully clear. Shower us with cheap, impersonal trinkets on holidays and expect extravagant presents in return. A framed picture of a lighthouse for Christmas. Try a top-of-the-line espresso machine for Mother's Day. According to Martha's logic, any hint at the unbalanced value of gifts resulted in a lecture about family and not keeping score. My grandma, bless her soul, wouldn't dream of asking for anything. Every time I'd inquire about a holiday gift, she'd brush it off with, "Honey, I have everything I need. Just come visit. That's all that matters." Meanwhile, Martha and Arthur treated gift-giving like a competitive sport. They show up unannounced, a triumphant glint in their eyes, brandishing their latest treasures. A chipped ceramic fruit bowl for Christmas, a set of mismatched oven mitts decorated with faded cartoon cats for Valentine's Day. Each offering felt like a slap in the face. The final insult came on Thanksgiving that year. I had opted for a quiet night in just Mark and me. Maybe we'd order some takeout and watch a movie. But of course, Martha and Arthur had other plans. They barged in, laden with shopping bags, their faces plastered with self-satisfied grins. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetie," Martha trilled, thrusting a brightly wrapped package at me. I unwrapped it, my stomach sinking. Inside was a gaudy scarf, the kind you might find at a gas station gift shop. The flowers were fake and plastic, and the fabric felt like sandpaper against my skin. "It's perfect, isn't it?" Martha beamed. "It matches your new coat." "Perfectly." I forced a smile. The coat in question was a vintage find I'd scored at a thrift store. The scarf, however, clashed spectacularly. "Thanks, Martha," I mumbled, trying to mask my disappointment. Meanwhile, Arthur was holding up a small box. "And for you, son," he declared, "a little something to help you unwind after a long day at work." Mark's eyes lit up as he eagerly tore into the box, revealing a pack of cheap drugstore cigars, the kind that smelled like dirty ashtrays and regret. "Thanks, Dad," Mark said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. That was it, the final straw. Here I was, staring at a birthday gift that insulted my taste and a husband who seemed more excited about a pack of drugstore cigars than his wife's well-being. Anger simmered inside me, threatening to boil over. But instead of exploding, I did something completely unexpected. I took a deep breath, forced a smile, and thanked them for the lovely gifts. A glimmer of hope arrived with my work performance. I landed the coveted quarterly award and a hefty bonus that practically screamed, "Celebrate." Venice, with its romantic canals and rich history, had always been a dream destination, Knowing I spoke fluent Italian sealed the deal. This trip would be a chance to reconnect with Mark and escape the suffocating grip of his parents for a while. Except news travels fast, especially bad news to eager ears. Upon learning of our travel plans, Martha and Arthur descended like hungry vultures. Venice, huh? Martha said, her eyes gleaming with a disturbing avarice. Sounds delightful. Always wanted to see those gondolas up close. Actually, I interjected, trying to be polite, this trip is just for Mark and me. A little romantic getaway. Arthur scoffed. Come on, Amelia, don't be selfish. We've never been to Europe, let alone Venice. Think of the pictures. Pictures. This wasn't about a photo op with gondolas. It was about escaping their smothering presence. I'm sorry, but, I said, my voice firm, this is a trip for two. My polite refusal triggered a meltdown of epic proportions. They called me selfish and greedy, accusing me of trying to alienate Mark from his family. The worst part, Mark, ever the peacekeeper, didn't stand up for me. Instead, he mumbled something about maybe they could come along and that it wouldn't be that bad. That's when I realized this wasn't just about a trip anymore. This was about boundaries, respect, and whether our marriage could survive his parents' constant intrusion. I looked at Mark, my voice laced with ice. Absolutely not. This is our trip, and they are not invited. The fight that followed was brutal. Harsh words were exchanged, and accusations flew like daggers. By the end, a heavy silence settled between us. We retreated to opposite ends of the apartment, a cold war brewing in our once happy home. Days blurred together, and the silence in the apartment was a constant reminder of the chasm that had opened between Mark and me. I didn't call his parents. The mere thought of their entitled whining made my stomach churn. Mark remained in his self-imposed exile. The only communication between us was a muted good morning in the kitchen each day. Then, on a random Saturday morning, I woke up to an empty apartment and a sinking feeling in my gut. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the notification sound grating on my nerves. Glancing at it, my blood ran cold. Airline ticket confirmations, 3 of them to Venice, purchased from my account. Panic clawed at my throat. No, it couldn't be. But as I scrolled through the confirmations, the sickening truth settled in. Mark, with the audacity of a seasoned thief, had used my trusted access to our bank account to book not only his own ticket to Venice but 2 more for his precious parents. Hotel reservations were also courtesy of my hard-earned money. It confirmed my suspicions. He'd gone behind my back, completely disregarding my feelings, and booked a vacation for himself and his leech-like family with my money. The anger, hot and furious, burned away any remaining affection I had for him. My fingers flew across the screen, canceling the return flights and hotel rooms. Next, with steely resolve, I revoked Mark's access to my bank account. It was a small act of defiance in the face of their colossal selfishness. A few hours later, my phone erupted with a call. Mark's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. The notification arrived a moment later, his voice laced with panic and fury. Amelia, where the hell are you? We're supposed to be checking into the hotel. What did you do with the tickets? I deleted the message without listening. Then came a barrage of texts from both Mark and Martha, a mix of demands, accusations, and veiled threats. Mark's final message sent a dark chill rippling through me. If you don't give me back access to the account and get us on that damn plane, Amelia, we're done. Consider this your divorce notice. With newfound clarity, I started making my own plans. I contacted a lawyer, and with each step toward independence, the weight lifted from my shoulders. Mark's divorce notice might as well have been a gift. I didn't wait for him to waltz back in with his tail between his legs. Packing was cathartic. Clothes went into suitcases, knickknacks into boxes. But the gifts from Martha and Arthur, those gaudy trinkets and mismatched sets, I left untouched. I lined them up on the living room floor, a garish monument to their selfishness. A final act of defiance before I slammed the door shut on that chapter of my life. Rama's house, with its familiar scent of cinnamon rolls and worn furniture, felt like a warm hug. Tears streamed down my face as I recounted the entire ordeal, the hurt and anger spilling out like a dam breaking. Rama listened patiently, a sad smile on her lips. I told you, honey, she said softly, her voice laced with a hint of I told you so, but mostly concern. Sometimes you've got to learn things the hard way. I know, I said, newfound determination settling in my voice. Maybe this is a good thing. Now I know what to look for, what to avoid. A few days later, a knock on the door shattered the peace of the afternoon. My heart lurched, but before I could react, Grandma ushered me toward the back room. Peeking through the curtain, I saw Mark standing there, looking lost and dejected. "Amelia, please," he pleaded, his voice thick with desperation. "Let me explain." Grandma opened the door a crack, her expression unreadable. Mark launched into a groveling apology, spewing words about realizing his mistakes and trying to distance himself from his parents. The anger that had been simmering inside me bubbled over. I barged into the hallway, a cold fury in my eyes. "Distance himself," I scoffed. "Mark, you were about to spend my money taking them on a vacation. This isn't about you suddenly seeing the light. This is about you being comfortable. Comfortable because I paid the bills and bought your parents presents." He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "No, Mark, this is over. I don't want to build a life with someone who prioritizes comfort over respect or someone who lets his parents walk all over him and his wife. I deserve better than that." Mark's face crumpled, but this time I felt no pity. The door shut with a finality that echoed in the silence that followed. Maybe Grandma was right. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something new, something better. A life free of entitled in-laws, a life filled with respect, and maybe someday, love that wasn't selfish or convenient.